Are- I think we're live now. Good morning, everyone. Come on now, let's try that again. All right, hey, you gotta help me get my energy up, right? So glad to see everyone today. I know that in the first few minutes of any class, there are people who straggle in for about 5 minutes, but this is about all of the dragging it out that I can afford with my notes. So we're going to open again with the same prayer that we've been opening with the last few weeks. It's from Philippians chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. And you might be interested to know that I just released a new Love Minimalism podcast this morning on this very verse. So if you want to go listen to me rattle on some more, you can go listen to that. So here we go. Dear Lord, in the words of Paul to the Philippians, this is my prayer, that our love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that we may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. You know, I don't know, I probably mentioned this before, but when I was 18 years old and a pretty immature teenage boy, I went off to Bible college in beautiful Williamstown, West Virginia. Williamstown Bible College. I spent 2 years there that I'll never get back. But it was a good experience in a lot of ways. And one of the experiences that I had there was chapel. Every day of class, typically our classes were on Tuesday through Friday because Monday was set aside for visitations. Part of our job as Bible college students was to visit people from the church who needed to be visited. It was part of that program. But on Tuesday through Friday, we had chapel every morning. I think it was at 9:30, it might have been 10 o'clock, something like that. We'd all walk across the street from the Bible college building into the church building and go into our little chapel room. And one of the Bible college students would preach to us. We had about a half an hour, and it was an opportunity for the older Bible college students, the third-year students, to get to preach, and a little bit of practice. And me, being a young first-year guy who's 18 years old, along with a couple other young 18-year-olds, we were pretty obnoxious and volatile. And we instead of coming in and preaching, we came in and did practical jokes. Like, we all had to wear ties. Do you remember the days when all the guys wore ties? Don's still wearing a tie. He's got a bow tie on. You guys would have been targets for me when I was 18 years old, me and my friends, because we would walk into Bible college. Remember, the ties in about 1980 had knots about that big, right? It's like wrapped halfway around your neck. And we would walk in, and we would walk behind somebody that was on the back row. We'd reach around, and we would grab their tie and yank it around the back of their neck. That really endeared us to those guys. And it worked it was funny until I pulled the guy's fake tie off, and he didn't think that was so funny. After that, we kind of stopped doing it. But one of the things I remember from chapel was a guy named Mike Simpson and Mike, if you're listening, here's my homage to you. Mike Simpson was ahead of me in Bible college, so he got to preach in chapel. And most of the guys, when they preached about things like purity or the evils of our society or some point of biblical doctrine. They were preaching the typical Bible college stuff. They were learning theology. They were preaching theology. They were, in the 1980s, we had things like the Clean Up TV campaign and stuff like that. And so we would preach about the immorals of our society of that time. We did a lot of preaching like that. But Mike got up and he would preach differently. And I remember at the time thinking, I wish this guy would preach about something with substance. You know what he was preaching about? Love. He was preaching about love. I was too ignorant in my biased mind to realize the importance of what he was talking about. I thought he was a little bit unusual anyway. He liked to drink coffee with ice in it. This is 1980, 81. Who drank coffee with ice in it? But we all do it now. You know, we all get iced coffees or frappuccinos or whatever. But no, he was doing it in 1980, ahead of the world. But I did not respect his emphasis on love because I was preconditioned to think that wasn't as important. And so we're going to start off talking a little bit about unconscious bias again this morning. Someone pulled me aside after church last week outside and pointed out that it should be subconscious bias, not unconscious bias. It's not bias we have while we're asleep. It's just bias that comes from our subconscious. I went and looked it up, and actually, technically, those two terms can be used interchangeably, so I'm good. So if it comes out subconscious or unconscious, you know what I'm talking about. It's things that impact us from past traumas, perceptions, things that have been embedded in us by repeated teaching over the years, stuff that help us to form opinions and perceptions and beliefs about people, places, and things based on these embedded factors. And the key point to understand is that we all have them. They're not necessarily good or bad. So, for example, it is deeply pretty much embedded in us. We have an unconscious bias against snakes with rattles on their tails. We all know that, right? You're walking down the pathway and a snake starts rattling his tail, you immediately jump back. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to consider, is this a good snake or a bad snake? You know, I need to stay away from that snake. It's because it's been embedded in us to have that reaction. So this tendency to understand things in a certain way is not necessarily good or bad until it affects the way we treat others. And if it causes us to treat others or view others or judge others in a way that is unloving, then we have to question it. We have to examine it. We have to work through it so that we don't let it continue to happen. And okay, I'm going to share a personal story here in a few minutes, but I want us to do a little exercise. So I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to picture it. As I'm telling the story, I want you to create the images in your mind. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, if you're willing to do that. I promise not to do anything goofy while you get your eyes closed. But I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to picture the images from the story. Two doctors were on the loading dock at the rear of a large hospital, talking and getting some air during a break in their long shift. They were comparing notes about a young patient and considering various possible causes for the patient's illness. As they stood there, a semi-truck backed up to the dock, and the driver jumped out, wearing bib overalls, work boots, and a red checkered flannel shirt. As the rear door swung open, the doctor on the right said to the driver, "I've never seen a young Asian girl like you chewing on an unlit cigar. I guess that's better than smoking it." The driver, feeling a little perturbed, snapped a reply, "I've never seen an African-American doctor rolling around on the loading dock in a wheelchair before." "Not the safest place for you to be. What happened to you anyway?" "Well, I've been this way since that IED blew up on me in Iraq." she replied. My friend Janice here rolls me out here every morning to review our patients' cases. Okay, you can open your eyes. How many of you imagined, when you first heard about the truck driver, you imagined she was a young Asian girl? How many of you imagined the doctor, one of the doctors being in a wheelchair? How many of you imagined one of the doctors being African American? We had 2 or 3 there. How many of us thought all 3 of them were white guys? Okay, that's our predisposition. This is what we've been trained to see. I first experienced a story like that. I couldn't do the original story because I didn't have access to the details, so I created that one. But I first heard this story, this concept, at a meeting I went to last spring. And this woman was talking about this subject, and she, in her story, it was a bar, and you had a bartender and EMTs and police and all that, and everybody assumed it was a bunch of guys and big deal, and turned out it was ladies' night, and it was all women. So we have this we create these images in our mind. It's not necessarily good or bad, unless it affects how we treat people and how we judge people. My bias that impacts me negatively from time to time comes from some trauma that I experienced as a young person. It wasn't one individual trauma, it was a whole bunch of little traumas. And it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I kind of realized what was happening to me. But when I was a when I was a kid, a little boy, I was always rather sensitive. I was never in the in crowd, and I was probably always a little bit nerdy, and I got picked on everywhere I went. When I was in school from day one, I was the target. I was the kid that got picked on. I was disrespected as an individual my entire youth. Happens to lots of kids. I was bullied a lot, all the way up until I got so big people were a little bit afraid to bully me. I did eventually get there. But I didn't realize how that trauma, that lack of respect, would impact me in other ways down the line. And I'll tell you where it's come out the most is in the people that I love the most. The people that I love the most are the ones who have the most ability to push that little button that says, you're being disrespected. You're being disrespected. And what would happen, I would handle it really well most of the time, but every once in a while I'd reach a point where it would all, and I would be angry, so angry that it was unreasonable, and I didn't know where it was coming from. The last time it happened, we were on a vacation to Virginia Beach, I think. Or no, it was Wilmington, North Carolina. Wilmington, North Carolina, my wife and I and our 2 daughters, my 2 grown daughters, mind you, they drove a separate car down there. That's how grown they are. In the late 20s, early 30s, we went down there for a vacation. And we all had to kind of park in these, it was kind of a weird parking thing. And we were having a fantastic time. This was about the 3rd or 4th day there. We'd spent the day, we'd taken a ferry over to Southport, North Carolina, which if you've never been to Southport, North Carolina, you should go. It was a wonderful day. When we get back to the beach house, and I asked my daughter to move her car to another spot. And she said no. She was tired. She didn't want to do it. Now, what I could do at that point is I could say, well, look, I'll move it for you. Why don't you, let me have your keys, and I'll go ahead and move it. But do you think that's what I did? No. That's a good answer. I did not do that. I got angry. I felt disrespected. I'm your father. You should do what I tell you to do, what I ask you to do. You're disrespecting me. Next thing I know, I've exploded. And I practically ruined the entire vacation. My wife doesn't like for us to go on altogether family vacations because she's concerned about my daughter's ability to push that button. And it all boils down to my extra sensitivity to feeling respected because I was so disrespected as a young person. This has built in me an unconscious bias that comes out once in a while and causes me to mistreat other people. It's something I have to question. It's something I have to examine. In the middle of all of that, when I was having that terrible, terrible reaction to my daughter, you know what my wife said to me? What you're doing isn't exactly love first, is it? You know, this is something we all have. It may not be the same as mine, but you've got yours. And it impacts how we view the person across from us, the person at the gas station, the person that we work with, this person or that person. I came across a video the other day of I don't know if any of you follow me on Facebook, you might have seen it because I reposted it. But there's it said the heading is Metal Singer Does Amazing Grace. My immediate bias is a metal rocker does Amazing Grace? Seriously? I mean, I see his picture. He's got hair down below his shoulders, and he's wearing a cut-off shirt, and it's got the whole design on it. It looks like a metalhead, right? I got to tell you, I listened to that. It was the most amazing rendition of Amazing Grace I have ever heard. And the power that he put into that was beyond anything I'd ever heard before. It's exactly the way we should sing it if we really understand God's grace. If you want to view, you can go to YouTube and say, and just put in Metal Singer, Amazing Grace, something like that. It should pop up. Amazing. Or you can go to my Facebook page and look at it. It's still there. But we all have this, and we need to understand that we all have this unconscious bias that affects how we view people around us. It affects how we react to people, and we have to be aware of it. We're gonna read a story that we don't really think about unconscious bias so much with this story, but it's there. It's in John chapter 4, and we're going to start in verse 1. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So it's kind of like if you're going from Indianapolis to Franklin, you have to go through Greenwood. You can't get there without going through Greenwood. So he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar. Near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" The disciples, had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you've nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and then come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet." Wonder what her first clue was. "I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship in the Father in spirit and in truth. For they're the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah is called Christ. I know that Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one you're speaking to, I am he." Just then the disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with the woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" I'm going to stop there. If I don't go back to that in a little bit, somebody say, "Hey, you forgot the rest of it," because I may get going, and forget. But what do we know about the Samaritan woman? What do we know about her? This is the discussion part. What's that? She's hard to get along with because she kind of went back and forth with him, right? Okay. What else do we know about her? She had 5 husbands? Okay. Okay. Hold on to that one. Pete. Okay, hold on to that one for a moment. There's somebody over here. Okay, what else do we know about her? She was Samaritan. Okay. The man she was with now wasn't her husband. What's that tell us about her? Shacking up. Okay. Hold on to that one. She knew that Jesus was a Jew. Okay, so she was observant. She was able to see that he was Jewish. I saw a hand over here. Was it? Yeah.
She knew about the Messiah.
Okay. She was aware of the Messiah coming. Anything else? She knew that the Jews had nothing to do with her. Okay, that's true. Did she have a really good attitude toward the Jews? Where do you think that came from? They were at odds at each other forever, right? So what had that embedded in her? A little unconscious bias there. It maybe boiled into conscious bias. Yeah, but it was built into her system over years. Okay, let's go back to some of these things that we talked about. So she had how many husbands? Why do you think, why does the Bible say she had 5 husbands? Hmm? Okay, that's fair, but what does the Bible say in John 4? Why does it say she had 5 husbands? No, not what drives her there. She ended up having had 5 husbands. What was the reason why she had 5 husbands? Why does the Bible say that? Does it say that? Divorced or died? Did she divorce him or did they divorce her? We don't know. That's an interesting point. That's an interesting point right there. So here's my point about this. We don't know why she had 5 husbands. We have been trained over the years to view this woman as shacking up. Or blaming her for the reason why she's had 5 husbands. Yeah, yes.
When the Sadducees come to test Jesus about the resurrection, they quote the Goel, or the kinsman redeemer law, that if a husband dies with no children and his brother has to marry him, he said, what happened? She got married 7 times and died and had no kids. Whose husband is she? The whole concept of Goel and the kinsman redeemer.
Mm-hmm.
Her 5 husbands could have died and she married brothers-in-laws.
That's exactly possible. Also possible. She could have had 5 husbands because of a whole lot of trauma. Men died young back then. Oftentimes, the women married older men. That was typically how it worked. The husbands would be a lot older. It would not be unusual for a woman to have had her husband die and get another husband who then died. We have made judgments about this woman based on somebody's perceptions based on our culture today. Yes. It's also possible. And we don't really know if she had children or not children. It's just Jesus said the man you're with is not your husband. Does that mean she's married, that she's sleeping with him? Could have been her dad, could have been her father-in-law, could have been one of her sons. We don't know. That's the point, is we don't know. We have made assumptions based on the bias that's been built into us. Okay? Yeah? Could have been. Yeah. Well, you're not the only ones that judged her. I think most of us have been judging her a long time. But here's the interesting thing. Jesus found her worthy to have a pretty in-depth discussion with. He cared about her. I mean, somebody said something about she was probably not. Pete, go ahead, Pete.
I'm Tony.
Oh, why do I keep calling you Pete? I don't know. Huh? Unconscious bias. I'm sorry, Tony.
The living water was available to her. She did not know it. So we could take that lesson saying that Jesus is available to us,
Uh-huh.
even though she had 5 husbands and living with someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. So Xandermander, go ahead.
So then what would you say the purpose of the verses weren't just to reveal in our day and age our unconscious biases? They are listed in the Bible for a purpose.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily what we assume it is. I mean, this interaction is like Tony said, this is an opportunity for us to learn about the living water, to learn about what Jesus can bring to us in our lives. And there's a few other things that happen in this interaction. I'm pretty sure it wasn't so that we would view this woman as a loose woman. That wasn't the point. The point was the living water. Where we have gone with it is somewhere else. I know you guys aren't used to hearing that, but this is where we've gone with it. And the thing I will say about the woman at the well is that Jesus found her worthy of having this conversation, and we also make some assumptions about her relationship in the society in Sychar. So it's an assumption. I had the same one. I was trained this way. I was taught this years ago in my Bible classes. She was there, like Tony said, at midday when most women were there in the morning to get their water. Do we know why she was there at midday? Does the Bible say that she was ostracized and therefore that's why she got water at midday? Xander? Uh-huh.
Jesus speaks in parables, but they're speaking to the people in that time. So why would it be incorrect to then use the cultural mores and situations of that time to then provide additional context to the story itself?
Well, there's a few problems with that. One, we don't live in that time, so we don't really fully know all the cultural mores. But also, I'll get to you. Hang on. Don't. Yeah, I would never miss you. My point here is that we're making broad-stroked assumptions about it, and why she was there at noon may have been that reason. It may have. But we don't know that. We've assumed it based on what we think we understand about their culture. Here's the thing to understand about her, though, is how did they react when she went back and proclaimed to them about this man that had told her everything she'd ever done in her life? They listened to her. She had their ear, and they responded to her. They didn't just discount what she had to say. There's a sign of respect hiding in there. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
We don't. We try to interpret it in the context that we understand. It's the same thing like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, everything. When it was written, it was during a time we were not there, and things were completely different along with mindsets and thought processes. So when you read the Bible, you have to understand that there is not just cultural, there is psychological, there is everything, emotional differences that we don't even comprehend when reading it. So you cannot completely take these parables and rubber stamp them to your life by making an assumption of 2023.
Very well said. Very well said. Yes.
It could very well be everything we've always assumed. Very well could be the case.
Mhm.
Know that. It could be. Why Jesus uses this point of how many husbands, etc., is I think Jesus knew her heart and knew exactly what it would take to convince her to make the statement she makes.
Mhm.
You are the prophet.
Mm-hmm.
How would a guy from Jerusalem, a Jew, know me, a Samaritan, has had 5 husbands, and I'm living at either my shaka or my brother, or my son, or my dad, or my brother-in-law? How did he know that? That was the purpose for
You notice that Jesus doesn't make any judgments about the fact that she had 5 husbands or that she's living with another person. He didn't make any judgment about it. He just states the facts. Here's the facts. It's kind of like the old, what was it, Dragnet? How many in here remember Dragnet? Okay, you're showing your age. Okay, just the facts, ma'am. Jesus just sharing facts. He didn't make any judgments. He didn't say anything about whether that was a good or a bad thing. He just said, hey, here's the deal. I know that you have had 5 husbands. And the guy you're living with now is not your husband. So maybe it was what we've always assumed. My point is that maybe not. And we make a lot of assumptions about her based on what we've always been taught, what we've always heard, what we've always had kind of taught to us, what our assumptions are based on our common current culture, things like that. And it's just a matter of recognizing that we have those. I don't want to get in an argument about whether she really did or didn't sleep around. That's not the point. The point is that we make assumptions about her. Yes, there was, yes. Yep. Right. Absolutely. Let's go back and let's read the rest of it. So just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with the woman, or with a woman. First of all, it doesn't say the woman, it says a woman. So they were surprised that Jesus was talking to any woman, not necessarily this woman. It's like, what are you doing? Because it's their preconceived unconscious bias that, you don't do that. But, okay. So, but no one asked, what do you want or why are you talking with her? Then leaving her water jar, the whole point in coming to the well to begin with, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did." Now, is everything she ever did recorded in this passage? No. So maybe this conversation was broader than what is recorded here, but we don't know that for sure. That would be another assumption. "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him. So not only did they listen to her, they acted on what she told them. Meanwhile, his disciples urged him, "Rabbi, eat something." But he said to them, "I have food to eat that you know nothing about." Then his disciples said to each other, "Could someone have brought him food?" "My food," Jesus said, "is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you have a saying, 'It's still 4 months until harvest'? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They're ripe for harvest. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, 'One sows and another reaps,' is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor." Verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me everything I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." She went back and she declared the good news of Jesus, told the community about this man, and they listened. They heard her, and they came out and responded. Interestingly enough, I was thinking about this in relation to Acts chapter 8. In Acts chapter 8, it doesn't mention the Samaritan woman at all. Acts chapter 8, 4 to 8. It says, those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. So this is right after Stephen was stoned and the church was persecuted and scattered, the great dispersion. Philip went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the signs he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many who were paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in that city. And you go on down through, you can read about Simon the sorcerer and the other experiences in Samaria. I don't know if the woman had any impact on that or not. It doesn't say. For me to assume that she did would be an assumption. Doesn't say that. But it is worthy to consider that her voice, when Jesus visited there, may have had a little precursor effect because they reacted and responded very quickly. Now it says here, though, it does say that they responded to the miracles, so it does say that. But we don't know what impact she had. But we do know that they listened to her. Let me catch up with myself here. The same things, we've made assumptions about a lot of assumptions about the Samaritan woman. And we do the same thing in our day-to-day interactions with other people. We look at folks different from us, and we make assumptions. We characterize them in our mind, and we make judgments. Just like I made that judgment about that metal singer who did Amazing Grace. I looked at him and made a judgment. I assessed him. Turned out to be a completely wrong assessment. After I listened to it, it's like I was blown away. I would have never imagined. And yet, I made that unconscious bias discussion or decision about who him. We come to conclusions about our neighbors without truly knowing them and their stories. How many of you knew about my background of being abused or bullied as a young person and how that might impact me today? How many of you knew that? We don't know each other's stories. We don't know what's happened to us in our past, but we make decisions about one another all the time. It's not that we need to be uptight because we have these unconscious biases. The thing is that we need to recognize them. We need to recognize they're there and then question them and say, is this right? And is this the loving way to treat someone? Is this the loving way to view them? Jesus.
I like Mike is not trying to change it here about love, but when Jesus was being crucified on the cross, he said, God forgive them, they do not know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a unconscious bias, and they didn't know. And it's just like the woman at the well. He knew her before she ever come there,
Mm-hmm.
for what was going to happen. And wasn't it great, the testimony, she went back, there was something that they seen about her.
Yeah. You know, the thing about Jesus on the cross and what he said, he said they don't know what they're doing. They didn't know who he was really. But Jesus did know their backstory. And when Jesus knows their backstory, that's where grace comes from. Yes, Vanessa.
I think that when we hear of a woman that's been married 5 times, we jump to a conclusion that she might be loose,
Mm-hmm.
wild, a floozy. But have you ever thought maybe the reason why she was married 5 times was possibly maybe the first husband was a wife beater?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the second husband was a cheater? And maybe she was
Yeah. Oh, that was my whole point. That's my whole point of what I've been talking about today, is that we've made assumptions about her that may or may not be correct. And what you said may be exactly what happened with her. So I completely track with that. No worries. Yeah, no worries. Yes.
I was thinking about approaching this from her, using your information. If you think about her having 5 husbands, perhaps with a combination of divorce and death, no matter what, still having 5 husbands, living with another man, whatever those circumstances are, that gave her enough spunk to talk, she a woman, to talk back to a man.
Mhm. Yeah. And she did that despite her own set of biases, right? And we talked about that briefly, right, earlier. When she saw him, she's like, when Jesus spoke to her, like, how can you, a Jew, talk to me, a Samaritan? She had her own set of biases. And yet, she didn't let that stop her from engaging and questioning and asking and listening. And that was the other thing I was going to say is that, why was she there at noon instead of the morning? We don't know. Maybe somebody knocked the water jar over so that she would show up there just in time to meet Jesus. We really don't know why. We assume. Okay, let's move on, or we're going to be here all the way through Lyle's sermon, and then he'll be mad at me. So, because he has this unconscious bias that he gets to preach. I don't know. Okay, so Jesus accepted and engaged with the woman regardless of the truth of her life. Whether she was a victim, whether she was loose, whether she was whatever. He engaged with her regardless of the truth of her life. Jesus said in Matthew 7, 1-5, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. In the same way that you judge others, you will be judged." It's not our job to let our unconscious biases judge our neighbors. And when I say neighbor, who am I talking about? Anybody around you. The judgment seat, once you get this, the judgment seat belongs to somebody else. And he's kind of jealous about it. Don't sit in it. We need to be mindful of our biases because they're little micro judgments we make about our neighbors. We're told to love them, not judge them. And I'm out of time, so here's your homework. I want you to discuss, either with somebody close to you or in a small group, discuss some ways to show kindness and compassion rather than judgment. Discuss some ways to show kindness and compassion to those that are different from you, whether it's different races, different orientations, or different religions. Discuss ways that you can show kindness and compassion. Thank you for putting up with me. I enjoyed the banter and the back and forth. I appreciate everybody being here, and let's have a great worship time together in just a little bit.